Hi, I'm Moon, aka Daniella Moonstar, and I also do YouTube videos, and I also post stuff on Facebook and Instagram, so check out my links in the description below as well. Alright, so we're going to be talking about the history of horse games, but more specifically, the evolution of horse games. So, over the years, horse games as a genre have evolved in many different ways, from graphics to even incorporation of different features. Regardless of how old other horse games are, they're still able to bring charm, joy, and nostalgia when it comes to revisiting them, especially ones from people's childhoods. However, most horse games unfortunately typically have the same formula whenever it comes to the appearance, what's available in the game, etc. So for starters, I'm gonna give y'all a beautiful timeline since, as y'all know from my videos, if y'all know me, I love my timelines and time periods. So we're gonna start from basically the very first batch of horse games to the present time, aka kind of like the future. So, do any of y'all have any questions before I start breaking down the timeline?
Ooh, are you gonna actually start like at the very, very beginning of horse games? Like, what year is that?
Specifically 1999, because I'm excluding the Barbie games since they're not necessarily equestrian related, so we're strictly talking about a core horse game.
Okay, okay,
general.
cool.
Okay,
Alright.
Is there any particular console or medium that you're going to be excluding?
Not necessarily, because I try to at least keep as what's available in terms of consoles, because there's not really much horse games on stuff that's like an actual console, like PS4s, Nintendo Switch, that sort of thing. Most of them are on PC, some are on Wii and Nintendo, but that's really about it, besides like some are on mobile and some being on like generic consoles, but yes, sort of. Alright, so we're gonna start with the time period from 1999 to 2001, and I call this the early stage of horse games. So to start by looking at the timeline, this was like the first time people were starting to try to make equestrian-like games, not related to something like Barbie or some kid franchise. So here we see games like Mary King's Riding Star, the very first Let's Ride game with Rosamund Hill, Riding Champion, and the Equestrian Showcase. Obviously, the graphics weren't the best at the time, however this was revolutionary at the time since horses in general are just generally hard to animate, and this was basically also the first time we see an attempt at a story format in a horse game. In Rosamund Hill / Riding Champion, they're basically the same thing roughly, but just different titles based on where you're from. And this is also where we see for the other ones, the first general attempt of trying to do like an equestrian rider simulator. So the first question we're going to be asking is, how would these games set the foundation for the horse games to come after this period?
Wow, that's actually a very big question. I think it set the tone for what horse games would eventually become, and they kind of go into a groove, if I have to say. They kind of fall into a groove from here on out. I don't really think they deviate much from what they were in the beginning, but you're going to show us if it does actually deviate a lot.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with Rattle. I haven't played with a lot of the really early games because I'm not actually that old, but I have noticed a lot of the titles do come from like series and movies, so you can see sort of at the beginning people are trying to make that breakthrough on horse games, and it's funny because looking at this, I can kind of see a lot of titles kind of bunched together between sort of 2010 and 2015. But I think if you were to actually play those games, a lot of them are kind of similar, as Rattle was sort of saying, and it isn't until we get to like post 2015 that we sort of see more diversity within the game mechanics as well as graphics and style and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, brilliantly said. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, because especially like since in this period, since this was very early, because especially like once you start getting to later periods, you can tell that the marketing has especially changed over time, from using like realistic pictures to starting to have more art-based or more cartoon-related titles in general, which is why I find it very interesting, considering since also this was just in general very hard to find games this early way back, because they generally really just came during the late 1990s, really.
If I can actually add on to that, which is pretty interesting, I know that you cut it off from 1999 to avoid the Bargui games, which is very interesting though, is that there was actually earlier games with horses and they were like DOS game RPGs.
Wow.
Yeah, and they had like a little horsey that kind of ran around on the screen. It was all 2D, but it was interesting that even from that early on, like horse games were trying to games were trying to implement horses into gaming essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're gonna go into 2002, 2010, and I call this the golden age of horse games because this is where I believe this is where there's just a huge boom in horse games. So we start to see a lot of companies like Viva Media, ValueSoft, Ubisoft, and others starting to try to jump onto this horse game bandwagon, and we start to see a lot of birth of iconic series such as Pippa Funnel Series, Pets Horse Club / Meta Champion, depending on where you're from, Horse Life Series, My Horse and Me, Riding Academy, Starshine Legacy, and of course Star Stable Seasons. And this is also where I like to point out that this is where the Let's Ride series starts to especially grow with bringing in new mechanics and approaches to cross-country dressage and show jumping. And this is where we also start to see other games trying to take more disciplines outside of the English ones, such as Western riding, and as well as uncommon disciplines like in Appassionata, where they do actual Appassionata. And this is where I generally believe where we start to see more additions of male character customization, even though very few games did this, and there's also some games where they start to use the question stars, such as Lucinda Green, and other medias from shows like Saddle Club or movies like Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron. However, a lot of these horse games had a similar repetitive formula when it came to the mechanic with some of the disciplines, story writing, horse care, etc. With this big boom of horse games, what games or game series was the most memorable for you that made a huge impact on you, and why?
Ooh, Pippa Funnel. that's like the first one that pops into mind. Pippa Funnel.
Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, that's a good choice as well.
I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say this is actually the part where I jumped into horse games. Was this boom? I didn't even know about the Punisher. What was that discipline you said?
Appassionata. It's essentially basically a discipline where like Liberty is basically picked that into a show format where they do not just one but like multiple horses. Sometimes they start out with one, sometimes start with 3, sometimes even up to like 5. You can sometimes see this in circuses, but usually like this kind of stuff is like its own show, and it's usually like that's like very fantasy or like mystical, that sort of thing. And they're generally hard to find, but they are kind of still around, just not as much.
Mm-hmm.
You have to basically catch them if you see them.
Oh, I see. But yeah, no, the Pippa Funnel was the Stud Farm Inheritance, was the first like true horse game I ever played.
Yeah, I'm so glad you have like this timeline, because I would not be able to remember like half of these titles had they not been in front of me. Because
that's why I look for every single game in here.
It's a huge chart. It's such a huge chart.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I know you haven't.
I would have broke that timeline.
Yeah, I know you haven't included it, but my first horse game was Barbie Horse Adventures. But from here, it was actually Bella Sarah. I don't know if anybody else had played Bella Sarah. I basically got this book because there's like a book series, and in the book it had like a code in it, and you went to the website. And I think this is generally, I'm not even kidding, the first time I had actually been on the internet myself.
Oh, wow.
Was to play this Bella Sarah game. I was such a menace. I would print out all of the horses constantly. I burnt through paper. But yeah, Bella Sarah was like one of the first, I think, actual games that I played on PC, because before that, it had been real life physical toys that I had been playing with. So definitely for me, Bella Sarah was kind of the turning point of like, that was when the craving began. I needed more. I needed to consume much more horse content than I currently was doing.
Yeah, for me it has to be Lucinda Green's From Here. That was my favorite game. I just liked that you didn't really have to stick to a storyline. It was kind of just get out there and do horsey things. It was quite good.
For me, I'd say like the most memorable has to be Pets Horse Club, aka Meta Champion Rider, because I believe that game specifically was the first time I saw like horse game story format based, and that one was the most memorable because I had a lot of fun from trying to get specific horses I want from the breeding system, trying to make sure I do the championships right, etc. And I just remembered a lot of memories just replaying that game over and over. And I feel like that kind of like similar with Abigail, that's what like put my initial drive to get more horse games. Because literally since that, basically as a kid, from like whenever I discovered like Amazon, and I would basically point out a horse game to like my parents, and I would basically like write that down as like a lot on my Christmas wish list or birthday wish list, like stuff like that. So if any of y'all have any other points before we move on to the next period?
All that I want to say about this period is I'm just so surprised, now that we have it on a chart like this, like between like 2012, 20, I can't get the years now, but I mean, there's so many good horse games that came out. Like, why did it stop? It's kind of sad.
All right, so now we're going into 2011 to 2015, and this is what I like to basically call the birth of horse MMOs and a lot of horse mobile games. This is where you start to see Alicia Online and Star Stable Online come to life, and there were still some horse games such as Ride Equestrian Simulation, some last installations of the Horse Life series, and a few others. As for mobile games, mainly I would say for like most memorable, if I try to put all of the mobile horse games, this would break the chart completely. So to mention a few, we have the My Horse app and Horse Haven World Adventures. And this is also where we start to see, unfortunately, horse game scams like Riding High, or just abandoned ones like Riding Out. And in general, this is kind of just I like to call like basically the post-golden age of horse games, because this is where we kind of start to see not much are really coming out, but it's like gradual. So the next question is, what do y'all think this was at the time where people either started to make more mobile horse games than per se like more MMOs or regular horse games?
Well, I have sort of noticed that, just sort of comparing the two periods, that because I sort of grew up with the golden era, I didn't have access to all of the games before that. But if we kind of actually look at the titles, there's a lot of them that are on, for example, the Wii, or I think I played Pony Friends on the little Nintendo 3DS kind of thing. So there's a lot more mediums kind of going, and at the time, buying cartridges, buying discs, buying DVDs was essential, basically. The same, even taking Bellicera, for instance, you needed the books to get the card to, get online sort of thing. There was a card trading game as well. So there was a physical element to these games. Whereas when we kind of go into post, this is when DVDs and that are kind of being phased out, because the internet's here now and we're all sharing and pirating games. So when this sort of happens, I think, of course, there's opportunity, as you said, for the like MMO games, but then there's also this dying of these traditional companies, for instance, doing horse games, because suddenly nobody's buying discs anymore. The Wii is kind of dying out. The Nintendo franchise has kind of moved off into a different kind of section. So it's really interesting to see this as we move sort of, as you said, like mobile kind of comes into it. Suddenly we have, I don't want to say a blanket statement of like a drop in quality, but you definitely see sort of like a difference in, the content that we're being given and the medium that we're getting it in. So I'm really glad you've done this timeline, because it's just like, it's blowing my mind looking at this now.
I see stuff like starters orders and those types of games, which is far more simulaty. Like Ride is definitely I love that game. I've played it like a million times before, but it's a very simulation type style game, as well as starters orders. And if I have my dates correct, I think the G1 Jockey series also started during this era. And I find it interesting that we see a lot more simulations coming out, but then like all the other kind of story driven, more charming games, I suppose you would call them, kind of die out in favor of these style games. And then the MMOs, which like boomed. Like, it's interesting that the MMOs boomed, not the that's kind of odd for me. Like MMOs like skyrocketed essentially.
I feel like also like another reason why like MMOs started to skyrocket, because for Alicia, since it was basically taking a newer concept to horse racing by putting a fantasy element, and as well as adding things such as like using your money at the time before it got rebirthed as a phoenix into the one that we have now that you can get everything for free for, and then Star Stable just starting out in 2011, where we start to have like a callback of Starshine Legacy from the previous era, and people starting to hop onto that because they're like, oh, I remember this from my childhood, I want to go to there. Or people just from newer kids being like, ooh, I like this, and it starts to gravitate more, especially because I feel like now this is where we start to see people like, oh, we can make money like this if it's in an MMO or mobile format. And especially for like app ones, like with Horsehaven World Adventures, if I get that title correctly, that one was more kind of based off like some other mobile games where like kind of like you do farming or decoration and have a normal currency that you can earn in game, or a currency that you can earn in game but not that much, so you can pay money to do it. And this is kind of also where I feel like we start to see a lot based off of patience in terms of wanting to work your way gradually and patiently.
Yeah, I know we're going to get to the mobile section, but oh boy, yeah, horse games are infested with mobile games, and I'm really sad about that fact.
A lot of them even have like graphics that are just like, ew. Some they look nice, some they look really bad. Some it just
The funny thing is that there was a little game, and I don't know if you have it on this thing. I'm not seeing it. It was something about Ubisoft. They made it. It lasted for about a year, but it looked really good, and it was a mobile game, and you could free roam. And I accidentally came across its trailer, but it was, I think, 2016, I think it came out, but it didn't last for like longer than a year, and then it just died out.
I need to see like a visual because I have no idea what you.
I'm gonna have to send you the video.
Yeah. I have no idea.
I'll slap something on the screen. I'll slap something on the
screen. I might have looked at, but then just forgot about in the back of my brain because of high school. But yeah,
I'm just wondering why there was such like a switch to the MMOs, because it looked like they were going quite strong with all the single player titles, and I wonder if they had started to sort of exhaust all the ideas. You know how most of these games or even like movies have this sort of generic idea of like of what a horse experience is. So I wonder if they sort of decided that they had enough of that and branched to a more MMO sort of open world kind of thing. It's quite
Possibly.
interesting to see. Yeah.
I mean, I also have the question of like, if you looked at general like gaming titles at the time, would you also see a similar sort of pattern of, you know, the single player, I don't know, like Uncharted sort of games, Resident Evil, that kind of stuff, and then you go on to like, you know, Skyrim suddenly coming out, and it's this, I mean, I know Skyrim's not an MMO, but the bigger kind of big titles, then you get an online version and everybody's playing it sort of together. I wonder if you'd also see that pattern happening here, and are we just a reflection of what the general like gaming community is also doing?
I think we'll see that in Call of Duty. Like long ago, Call of Duty had split screen. And Doom, for example, you could LAN, but then that kind of systematically got weeded out. And then Call of Duty was split screen. Then it became, I think that became LAN, and then you could go online. And now all Call of Duty games are online. But yeah, I think that could, maybe horse games were like way like ahead of its time.
Like, have you guys seen that brilliant photo of the Call of Duty at a LAN party where the guy is like duct taped to the ceiling? I think that's just a brilliant photo of like the lengths people would go to like have a LAN party. That's such a throwback. It's funny how like I don't think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think horse games ever sort of had a LAN section, just because they assumed horse people weren't actually together at the time.
We were lonely people.
Yeah, we were spread out.
It's also, especially like when you look at how they look on the outside, I feel like generally a lot of them like, oh, this is only for kids. There's no teenagers or adults or elderly people are gonna touch this. We don't care about that, which is why people don't realize like it's actually big. Just in terms of its loudness, it's small, because you don't see this talked about with someone like Jacksepticeye or like Corey X Kenshin. I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna play the latest horse game on the You usually see like a lot of Star Stable YouTubers or just people that are heavily invested into horse or animal games touch these more than an average person that's like touching like Fortnite or like the next Call of Duty game.
It's an absolute niche genre. That's the problem, I think, with horse games. And due to that, it's the target audience and all of that kind of makes it a small niche, and that's why people just don't, you know, spend money on them, which is really sad.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking it could actually be a kind of an insult that they didn't add any land, because they all thought that horse horse gamers didn't have friends.
Friends. We were all just really lonely sitting in our bedrooms.
Bunch of
Only here just sitting with like our imaginary friends, just drinking tea.
horse chicks
Oh,
don't
that's
have
quite
friends.
sad, actually.
We
Yeah.
we are a sad bunch.
Oh, all right. So to wrap that up, we're now going into the. This makes me want to say a cuss word, but I'm gonna retain my cussing. I'm retaining to myself. So 2016, 2019, I call this the Shady Steam Age, and this is where we start to see a lot of crappy horse games, but also some horse games trying to make it on consoles such as the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation, etc. But most of these games are very underperformed. For example, the duo of My Little Riding Champion and Unicorn Princess. They're basically made by the same people with the same exact graphics, with both nice looking covers. Like, honestly, if you look at this, you're like, well, this is probably gonna be a good horse game. Then you go pay your $30 for it, and then you look and you're like, oh no. Because the graphics look like something from 2005 with crappy voice acting, and as well as character designs in terms of horses and riders just being disgusting, which is not really worth $30 when you also take into account as well if you look at the mechanics of both of these, with the controls being really bad. And this is also where you start to see our first time seeing someone trying to remake a horse game, where they try to remake My Riding Stables Life with Horses into My Riding Stables Your Horse Breeding, and it performed really bad because it basically dumbed down really bad compared to the original, with having more kiddie-ish bright graphics, not really making good environments, as well as stripping what the original prior had, with giving it crappier controls and making it not really worth $20. We did have some average horse games that came out, such as the birth of Horse Riding Tales and Horse Riding Deluxe 1 and 2 being okay for this period. However, this is also where we start to see SSO going into the tyranny age, where stuff starts coming out from the scenes once we see the flaws of SSO in general, and people in this period specifically, I feel like, where they just basically start to become very desperate for a better horse game, to have graphics in AAA games, as well as actual challenging horse controls compared to basic WASD or basic arrow keys. So I hope y'all have never touched these games.
Oh, sorry, I have played My Riding Champion. Why? I don't know
your
why I
soul.
did do that, but I did do that.
Your soul.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
It's okay. Desperation got over. You had the desperation.
I did.
Just don't ever do that again.
I will do my best. I cannot promise anything.
Regardless if y'all played it, seen it, saw it, and ran away from it, why do y'all think this is where we start to see companies starting to have a lack of effort when it comes to actually making a horse game, regardless if it's for an MMO or console or just normal PC?
Ooh, that's a really good question, and I kind of sort of touched on this in my topic a little bit, but I think you've got a complete market domination by the biggest horse game, which is obviously Star Stable Online, and the general expectancy, I suppose, of games. Like, they've got to have good graphics, they've got to have good controls, they've got to have maybe a storyline, they've got to have lots of horses that people can have and buy and sell and train, and these expectations that are up here, which they should be, we should be raising our expectations as we go through the years. But I think when you have complete market domination with Star Stable just sitting on top of literally everybody, that these smaller games maybe would be a bit intimidated by the thought of having to rival someone like that who's been going, since just after, as you said, the golden era. And then, of course, you have cheap kind of cash-in games where small companies come along and be like, horses are easy and horse people are dumb, so let's just give them a silly pink game and a nice cover photo and they'll buy it. Yeah. So I think, just in general, that's the kind of age where it kind of felt like the rest of the gaming companies and community had kind of just given up on us, and we were kind of left on our Jack Jones to kind of things work.
Yeah, definitely, because like I feel like they also might have felt like they can just sort of take advantage of us horse people by releasing subpar sort of quality games, because it's such a niche area. So they probably thought that, well, it's a horse game, so horse people are going to buy it anyway because it's got a pretty horse on the front cover. They may as well buy it since they haven't had a new one in a while. So they sort of had the chance to get away with it.
Kind of like what both you and Abigail said, were like, they think like, oh, we don't really gotta put much into the graphics, because I feel like since they assume this is a kids thing, and this kind of also explains with like some kids TV shows are like, oh, we just gotta make it look pretty on the front and kids will eat it up no matter what, when they don't realize that they're forgetting that there's an older demographic that plays horse games. And I feel like also when, in general, if you think about for people that are desperate, when you see other genres for like fantasy, such as like the Final Fantasy series and Kingdom Hearts getting better graphics than their old 2000 counterparts, and seeing in action games getting better with realistic graphics, motion tracking in some choice games, as well as a bunch of other genres, you start to crave that wanting of like, why can't our games be on that level? Like, why can't we have that kind of realism in terms of fantasy or just plain old realism? I feel like also basically just like in terms of people wanting it to get better, I feel like maybe because they think that they're not able to make it big in terms of money outside of, oh, we'll just put it in front of kids and they'll be fine with it.
I'm going to take Riding High as an example because I think that it kind of fits into this. Riding High did not go as high, okay, no pun intended, as it wanted to go. As it wanted to go. It didn't go that high. But what it did manage to do was show how desperate players are for a horse game of that type. And that's what saddened me about that story. It is so telling, how, like I said, desperate. You made the joke earlier that I was desperate to play My Riding Champion. I damn well was. I just wanted a horse game. Why can't I have a good horse game? And I don't know why I can't have a good horse game. But the reason is essentially that they just don't take it seriously. We're not important, and that's really tragic.
And it's also just even sad when you look at that situation, because people put in like, some even went over $1,000 just to have that game, when for all we know the original people behind it just took it and ran for whatever they used with it. And it's just really sad because it was also just very, once you look at it now, when the first Alicia started to shut down, you start to see how timed it was with the scammer. Like, oh, Alicia's shutting down, we're gonna be here, so we'll be right here for you, baby. And then when people start to invest so much time and effort, it's just when people start to realize that it's not gonna happen. I feel like also that kind of just led to people doubting that there actually be a good horse game one day as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's really interesting to, even as you mentioned, like Alicia Online, to see a game literally die. Like that game died. The company gave up on that game, and yet it's still going.
Yeah.
If that doesn't tell you the kind of dedication that this community has, no matter the drama that goes on behind or whatever it is, like basically this community took a dead game and revived it. That's still alive to this game. To this day.
And they built it up too. They like took like they even tried to bring stuff from the failed 2.0 version, try to make stuff not like, for example, for the, I believe the advanced course, which is the other jungle one, which is like I forgot the name. It started with the W. I'm sure y'all can find it if y'all played it. But that was originally just a speed course only, and they brought that over into a magic format. And they were that dedicated to try to bring more stuff from 2.0 into a 1.0-ish fashion, but still trying to make stuff fresh, regardless of the drama that's happened with the devs and everything else.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It is crazy.
All right. With that being said, we're now into our final time period, which is from 2020 to the present, and I call this the rebuild phase or age, whichever you want to call it. And in this age, we start to kind of see a slow eruption of people starting to step up to make indie horse PC games again, or console or mobile, depending on which one, to try to get in terms of Gucci graphics that we see in games today. And of course, with some mobile games, and also people trying to have better inclusivity with genders besides girls, as well as racing trying to have a little bit more engaging content, etc. And it usually either hit or miss. We still had a few horse games strictly targeting kids, such as the recent Spirit Riding Free game and Horse Club Adventures, but still using the girly kid mechanic. Here, have this instead. And then for mobile games, I feel like the most impactful, in my opinion, were Wild Shade and Equestrian. And out of the choose for me in particular, I feel like Wild Shade was more successful compared to Equestrian because of how, even though they do have similar but different concepts from Alicia, for a fantasy horse racing game on a mobile version, it's pretty good compared to other mobile horse games, obviously. And it was probably, in my opinion, probably in terms of mobile games, in terms of horse games, it was probably one of like the best qualities we had in a while for that environment, from having okay environments and having different mechanics. But as for Equestrian, there were some nice qualities about it, with environments being okay, as well with having a different approach to how to do show jumping and dressage. But at times, it also just felt rushed when you look at the graphics for the horses and riders sometimes. As for PC games, we start to see games like Astride introducing the age concept, Tales of Rain Ravine trying to break out of that G-rated norm of horse games and wanting to target a more older audience, besides with seeing the small bit of dialogue with Cussin, as well as trying to have a more mature theme, as previewed from their Patreon, and also trying to see people trying to better attempt at trying to replicate riding like in real life, and that horse game introducing the use of more equestrian props, and more that are in the works, striving for better graphics, environments, and mechanics that a lot of people that played horse games growing up have always wanted. So the final question for this is, why do y'all think more people that are smaller want to make a better horse game compared to existing horse MMOs like SSO, who is not doing much in terms of effort at the moment, trying but not, and as well as other bigger companies not trying to put in effort as well?
I'm gonna jump in on this one. I think the reason why we're seeing these types of games is because many of them are aged. I think many of these game developers are aged between like 20 and 30. And I think that they grew up in this era of like a dead horse gaming genre. And I think that kind of inspired them to try and make games that they can see like in the earlier years. I mean, I think that they grew up during that big boom of good horse games. And then they went through that era of terrible horse games. And then when they finally had the chance, they're like, I'm going to make a horse game. And then, because many of these people that I spoke to, I actually had a chance to speak to a couple of them, but it sounds like people who had bad experiences with these horse games and they decided to make something better. And I think that's what's going on. And I'm happy for that. If bad horse games inspire you to make better horse games, I'm all for it.
I completely 100% agree with Rattle. I just think people have, like, as you said, gotten sick of, there is a problem of like these companies that are dominating the kind of genre that we have, kind of just realizing that and just not really giving us the content that I think we deserve. And then these people come along and, they're talented, they're creative, and they basically said, well, I can do it better. And like, I hate to be horrible, but they can. I have, we look at a game like Tales of Rain Ravine. We've never seen a game do as much with the mechanics as it has done. Now, I don't think the public version is out, but for the Patreon version of that horse game, it's running on Unreal Engine 5. And I do agree that the horse mechanics and animations aren't quite there, but the surroundings and the rest of the game is just impeccable to look at. Like, I'd say if you can't run Red Dead, this is the next best thing for you. And I think, like, generally it's just people coming along and basically saying, like, well, why can't I do it? And I'm so glad that we live in a time where that's possible for people to just do, because I can't imagine in like 2002 anybody just popping up and being like, I'm gonna make a game for the 3DS, let's go, guys. Like, I can imagine that was like impossible. So I'm really glad that we're able to see these games popping up.
Oh yeah.
I feel like also because, especially with now realizing how SSO runs in terms of not just the game itself, but as a company, people are just generally starting to get fed up of how current horse MMOs are running. And I feel like this essentially starts to just start on a drive of hoping that these newer games that are very promising to actually hopefully be a lot better than the older counterparts. And some also I also feel like some people also just hope that these games also hope to revive the drive for older horse MMOs like SSO to actually get better instead of just settling for small slivers just because they're making a lot of money off of it over kids or just people that just want to collect a lot of horses, etc. And with that going forward, seeing people trying to put in so much effort to have a good horse game really makes my heart happy, because I guarantee you, if for little 10-year-old me, I'm pretty sure she would be very happy to see something like this and then put it on her Amazon wish list like everything else.
And I think a lot of these creators have learned from previous games mistakes. They see the whole potential in the market, and maybe there's also a lot more horse people sort of making these games. And with these games, they're gonna set a sort of new standard. And even if we end up having another flop, we see on the chart, you're gonna have so much substance in these games, so much content and replayability and online content that they're gonna be able to stay online forever. So I think it's just a really good market for them right now.
Oh yeah.
That actually brings up a really interesting point of games maybe that haven't lived up to expectations. Who's actually making them? Are we having horse people that are in the boardrooms, that are in the graphic design teams, or are we sort of getting these people who are we can just make a horse game, here's a horse asset off of this marketplace and we can just slap it into a game? How many of our games that we love and consume, or even the ones that we really don't like, are actually made by people who actually care about the topic and actually care about the horses themselves?
Yeah, because especially for when you look at Red Dead Redemption 2, people think that's a horse game, but it's not. It's an action story game.
Yeah.
It mind blows me how they even went to the mile of trying to get motion capture of horses, and that's why I feel like Red Dead Redemption 2, outside of the horse game genre, has, in terms of animation, the best horse riding animations possible compared to other horse PC games. And I feel like once people start side-eyeing that, they wonder if horse games like SSO really do take effort in trying to actually get better animations, because if we look at the horses of SSO, especially my least favorite horse breed, the Gen 3 Frisian, which is still not fixed yet.
That poor Frisian.
Somehow they thought a horse like that should run and act like they're on cocaine, whereas apparently the games from Red Dead Redemption 2 can run elegantly and proudly, but apparently they did not have no comprehension. I don't know if they smoked some weed prior, or they were just drunk or something for Christmas, or God knows what happened. But yeah, I just hope in general that one day horse games that are just settling for less realize that they still need to settle for more and have a bigger drive to remember why they started their horse games in the first place, and try to improve over time to at least still be a MMO that still lasts for years and years and years, like World of Warcraft or even Wizard 101.
There is another point I just briefly want to touch on before we sign off, because when you're ready. But the thing is we discussed Star Stable. Poor Star Stable. She's getting bashed again today.
Getting demolished today, boy. Ooh, she getting demolished.
There's unfortunately a very easy punching bag.
Yes.
But shame, no, poor Star. They really are trying. We have to acknowledge this. They are trying.
They're
but
trying.
They are. The little that they're doing, I do feel, they're taking a step in the right direction, and that's very good. But Star Stable, Rival Stars, Wild Shade, not as much. What's the other one? There was another one. The My Riding Tales. No. I'm actually specifically talking about. Sorry, I'm actually specifically talking about games that are asking money. This is something that the microtransaction part of horse games actually got a little worrisome for me at one point, because we had My Riding Tales, we had Rival Stars, we had Star Stable, Wild Shade not as much, but then we also had, if Alicia Online was still active, it would also have been a microtransaction game, and then we have Equestrian the game. And I was actually I'm so glad to see these third-person big PC games finally starting to launch, because so many games on these mobile platforms use these predatory microtransactions, and that just drives me crazy.
Because a lot of them drive on patience to see how, because they're like, well, you have this 100 weekly allowance of star coins, and if you wait just 9 weeks or 10 weeks to get yourself a Gen 3 American quarter horse, you can do that. Or you can pay for our $50 something 5k whatever amount of star coins to get more horses in just one click of a button.
I was completely preyed upon the other day, and it was my own fault. Like, I was doing it to myself. But for instance, I paid about £50 for Red Dead Redemption 2. So that's the entire game. That's a story game. That's online. You know, it's a big chunk of money, but you know, I got a full game, and I'm not even kidding when I tell you that Equestrian the game is not out yet, and I have spent over £70 on that game, and I have almost nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
So it's just stuff like that where Red Dead Redemption is a finished game, and I hate to say, oh yes, we can compare Red Dead Redemption to Equestrian. That's not what I'm trying to do, but I'm trying to look at prices. Someone could get a fully fleshed game, and I went and spent £70 on a game that isn't even globally launched yet. That's why I completely agree with you, Rattle. Like, I hate microtransactions, because the thing with the horse game industry, just to kind of throw this in there, is I've noticed that they're not actually micro. Like, a lot of the time, I'm not talking about like £2 or £3, to get a little horsey, or to go an extra race or whatever it is. It's like I have to put in £50 for me to get like one horse and like a set of tack, and it's nuts. It genuinely is nuts, and I just feel so terrible. And it makes me really happy when I hear games like Astride saying that they're going for DLC, because yes, I mean, DLC has its own issues, but at the same time, at the end of the day, DLC is completely optional. Will I get preyed upon, and will I buy every single DLC pack? You can bet your bottom dollar that I will be doing that. But I'll feel much better about it than I do, paying £70 to get almost nothing to show for it.
That's the thing. I actually did the math. Equestrian the game is... I'm working on a review, but I was so upset when I first made my review. I actually had to calm down and redo it. Oh, no. I was not very happy with the game. But I actually did the math on that game. And it costs you $120 to get parts of the cosmetics currently available in the shop. And you have to pay $240 to get everything. And I can take $120 right now and buy Elden Ring fully. The big pack Elden Ring. I'm rather gonna do that.
Yeah, definitely.
That's why I want to calculate what happens if you're trying to, like, how many star coins does it take to try to get everything in Star Stable? Because I guarantee we would see something in the thousands, because of how much of them are trying to cap at 10k to force you to try to get ones with star coins. Because I try to milk so much out of people that play these games.
I do think that we have figured out, though, why the Frisian is so expensive now, because we have to pay for its cocaine habit as well.
We got to support its drug use.
Sorry.
It can't go to rehab, so they have to try to get it out.
I had to get that out of my system, sorry.
Fair enough.
Sorry, Nix, you wanted to add something?
No, I think you guys have raised all the sort of meaningful points.
Don't know if the crack cocaine comment was meaningful, but
had to be done, Abigail. Had to be done.
All right. So, closing this out, overall, horse games evolved in graphics, but not much in content, story, customization, etc., leading to people wanting a horse game with more than just the bare minimum of horse care and basic horse riding with the 3 basic English disciplines. And in general, I feel like this is where we start to see people just wanting more in terms of, with the games coming out in the rebuild phase. It just basically set hopes in people's hearts of hoping to one day that they'll actually get the game that they've always dreamed of as a kid. I feel like, in terms of based on how we've looked at all of these horse games, I feel like, considering how over time we've never really, ever since that huge, big golden age boom of horse games, we haven't had that kind of boom in years, and that's the truth. And going forward, I wish that horse game people that, like, companies that are capable of being able to bring something like this to life, of what people have been aching for, what they've been dreaming of for a horse game to actually take that thought and do it, and not just have people do it just because they want to do it for the sake of, oh, I can do it better. Which is why I feel like now going forward, when it comes to horse games and how in the beginning, where you think from once you started when you were a kid that, oh, these are fun, but as you grow older, you start to see the flaws a lot of them have over time. And especially when you look at MMO related ones, it even correlates to how so far in the past that they're all relatively the same formula and not doing something different that has a big enough impact for the bigger gaming community to be like, hey, there's this sort of game genre that looks really cool, we should try it. And I feel like the day that we finally do something that's impactful with being more inclusive and having an actual good-looking game with actual good content and engaging interactions that make it memorable enough, it will be able to actually make a huge impact on the whole gaming community as a whole, to have that bigger part be able to see us and actually hear us. Because at the end of the day, what not only we crave for a better horse game, but we want people to hear us, to hear our voices and hear our wants, so that way we can actually feel equal and inclusive as a video game genre.